Welcome to the waiting room, folks. Hey, I am really sorry. The last 2 weeks I've had difficulties, which ended up requiring me to replace first the sound card and then the actual speaker system. So I couldn't do one until I knew about the other. So it put me in a really peculiar situation. I do want to let you know that the show that I canceled that was supposed to be with Colin Edwin, previously of Porcupine Tree fame, will happen next week live. Okay, so wanted to make sure people knew that. I had also scheduled with my guest who's here tonight, and he was good enough to hold on for a week so that we could get things straightened out. And this is John Crispino from Seconds Before Landing. He's also a sponsor of mine because my show is rebroadcast on his network, secondsbeforelanding.com, on Friday nights at Saturday nights at 11 o'clock. So, hey, John, you've been here with us before, but welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And a whole lot of congratulations on this new album. It is really starting to gain some steam, and it is just another one of your very, very interesting projects. Could you first explain what you do, John? I mean, because Seconds Before Landing is your personal musical playground, but it's also you don't do it by yourself.
That's correct. Here's the way it started. I wanted to do an album, and this goes back a few years now, and I was writing more or less the same type of rock stuff that I always was involved in. But what took place was even though it was very good musically, I thought, I wasn't satisfied. So I went back and I scrapped everything and I started from scratch. And I put an album together called The Great Deception. And it took me about 1.5 years to write all that. But what I did was I wrote more of a story that I felt. And along the way, I met other musicians that were pretty much friends of mine, or at least strong acquaintances of mine, and I invited them in for the instrumentation that I couldn't play myself. So I started the first Seconds Before Landing project, and fortunately for me, those same musicians, outside of the guests that I had with Trey Gunn and Timmy Bogert from Jeff Beck and so on, my core group of musicians have stuck with me for each of the 5 projects that I put out so far. So yes, it is my idea, but the overall project is me combined with the musicians that I work with.
Mm-hmm. And you also always have a lot to say, John. Which each one of your projects finds either a story or a cause, and then kind of ramps on whatever that is. And this one that you picked to me is so interesting because I am a space nut. All things science fiction, and including modern space. I mean, I remember the moon landings and watching that, but I, about 6 or 7 years ago, went out to the Mojave Desert in California and saw the competition for the X Prize.
Oh, my gosh.
So me and a friend of mine were involved in that whole thing that's going on. I'm very, very interested in what's going on in private space exploration now, because it seems like our federal government has decided to, pack that in somewhat since the space shuttle program.
Right.
But you go way back. The story of this project goes back to the beginning. Could you talk about it a little bit?
Sure. To be honest with you, like Bob Ross would say, it was a happy accident for me on this because I enjoy reading when I'm not in the studio and researching a variety of things that have to do with the world. And I just came upon a story about Yuri Gagarin. And the more I read about him, the one thing that impressed me the most was the incredible amount of bravery that he personally had and the situation that he came from, being basically a poor peasant child through a village in a farmland that was war torn and so on and so forth. And he graduated and got himself into the position where he was the first man in space. So what I did was I dug into those stories and I tried to find out as much information as I could. What I ran into was the fact that it's still difficult to get precise information from anything that took place in Russia during that period of time.
Mm-hmm. Or any period of time.
Yeah, I suppose you're right. But what I did was I went back and I had a teacher one time that told me, listen, he said the best way to research things is to find 3 different independent sources, read them, and then put your own guesstimation based on the information you received from the 3. And that's what I did. And I found a wonderful book for me anyway. It was called The Man Who Fell to Earth. And it talks about Yuri Gagarin, and then it talks about Vladimir Komarov also. And I just started to delve into each of their lives and their personal lives and so on. And as much as I didn't want to get involved in another concept album, I found myself so fascinated and so enamored with these guys and their bravery that I just started to write lyrics based on pretty much what I was able to learn about their lives and then build the music around it from there.
So how about we start with this one from the beginning of the story to the end of the story, because as we go along today, I really want to get the story across to everybody because I think it's really important. To be honest with you, it's an incredibly historically relevant thing that we were never quite privy to.
Correct.
And at the same time, historically is actually incredibly important because it shows to a certain extent the danger these people went through. And to us now, the technology and everything they were using was so primitive compared to what you have in your shirt pocket right now.
That's exactly right. You know what? One of the things that actually took my breath away was the inside of the space capsule that he went into himself. He wasn't even able to wear all of the materials that he would have normally wanted to take or they would have wanted him to take because you couldn't move.
Yeah.
So like it's like in a thimble, but he was going to go into outer space with this, but he was bound and determined he was going to do it. And, I think I'm a relatively brave person in most cases, but I cannot fathom the amount of bravery that these people had to be able to do that at that particular point in time.
But I do think it was a combination of a severe amount of confidence in being told it's going to work, and a lack of information, knowing that it was highly doubtful that it would work. Because they weren't. It isn't like today where people could look at the science and say, "Hey, that's not going to work," because the science just wasn't there.
Well, for Gagarin, I think he went into, like you said, with more confidence than everybody around him. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you from everything I learned about Komarov and the way he ended up passing away, that was pretty much the opposite because
he was betrayed by his government.
Exactly. He was betrayed by his government. He pleaded with them. He actually pled with some of the government officials, KGB or whatever you have, and he asked them to please hold off on this because I know it's not going to come back. And according to the stories, now, again, once I'm putting this together from multiple sources, Gagarin almost forced himself to go ahead of Komarov, not because he wanted any more accolades or anything. It was because that he knew that this flight was not going to come back. And the Russian government would not allow that to happen because Gagarin was their national treasure. Mm-hmm. And if he passed away, then what were they going to hang their hat on? You know what I mean? So Komarov was the one that took it. And he really did. He pled with them. Then they said outside of a place where he was living at the time, he was so emotionally shook up that they had to hold him up because his knees buckled. And I get deep into the story, and it really affected me. These guys were pioneers and courageous and every other accolade you want to throw at them because
I would also throw in ignorant.
Yeah, well, they were ignorant to a lot of
because they
things.
had no idea what they were getting into for the most part. So we're dancing all around it. So let's start talking about Yuri Gagarin.
Mm-hmm.
And you had mentioned originally that he came from a peasant background. He was poor, but he did some things in order to get into the right schools.
Correct. And then they were eventually led into a place that was called Star City. Probably still is called Star City. And Star City was just basically for lack of a better terminology, like barracks that they built in the middle of nowhere for the people that were going to be involved in this space race to live, to reside, and learn and train, and so on and so forth. So he advanced himself from the peasant village that they came from after experiencing many, many hardships through there and watching his family be taken from their homes and having to live in mud huts for a while and so on and so forth. It was very brutal. I mean, even bad days for us now, we're spoiled because we don't have anything like this anymore as far as that condition. And these people, they had to work hard, fight hard, and just try to survive. And then he eventually got his education and he moved into the Star City, and he just was not going to be defeated by any of the tests that they ran on him, and they put him through hell. And he passed it all, and he became their go-to guy. And, in 1961, they launched him.
Yeah, and what was going on around this is, all the tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States and this, announced space race.
Correct.
And there was all of the pressure exerted because who was going to be first and who was going to do it better and how they were going to do it and how they were going to publicize it. And all that was going on as kind of a framework for all this.
That's right.
Very, very strange times. Let's play a song that from the new album Cosmonaut that gives a little bit of the flavor of what was going on. What would you say that would be?
If you want to start in his childhood, I would start right at the beginning of the album. March into Klashenko would be a good one.
Okay. Let's do that. So this is called Marching to Klashenko. And what's going on in this piece?
Well, this talks about a little bit about what I just told you. It talks about him growing up and watching the army come into his village one day and just start destroying not only the physical buildings but the people as well. And the interesting part is they kind of got over anyway because they were using the people as targets. And the ones they herded away to a certain area, then the younger ones that tried to run, they would use them as targets and shoot them down. And it speaks about that. But the interesting part is one of their military men, meaning Gagarin's people, were in that village. And he got hurt, and he was very badly hurt. And what happened was they thought he was dead. And he had a grenade on him. And what he did is he held the grenade close to him, and then he beckoned the commander from the other side over, and he pretended like he wanted to say something to him, and he pulls the pin on the grenade and kills himself and kills this, I think he was a colonel. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he was a colonel.
He did
and
that?
He blew him up. Yeah, according to all the things, yeah, which I thought, listen, here's like one of the ballsiest things you can do, but if it did really play out like this, like the way I was able to read about it, that's a pretty great story.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I did. I put it all to music, and it tells the story.
Okay, so let's play one of the earlier tracks of the album. It's the fourth track. It is called March into Klashenko.
Klashino. Yeah.
Klashino. I already put it up on the thing and it cut off the end of it.
That's all right.
Okay, this is brand new music from Seconds Before Landing. You're listening to Seconds Before Landing here on the House of Prog.
arms like they're ravens in the snow. Breaking down the doors, you knew they had no place to go. Poke them harder with your bayonets. Poke them once again until the clothes start getting wet. Herd the others down the path and take them to the shed. Use the kerosene to light them up, make sure they're dead. Take your aim at children who are running through the fields. Shoot the tallest ones, they more than likely are the shields. I saw you march into Crispino, like wolves descending on their prey. I watched you march into Crispino, make sure no one would get away. I watched our colonel call you over, pretend he couldn't see or hear. And when you leaned in close to listen, he pulled the pin beside your ear. He pulled the pin.
You were just listening to brand new music from Seconds Before Landing. I am here with John Crispino of Seconds Before Landing, and we're talking about the new album Cosmonaut. And we just played a track that talked a little bit about the subject, who is Yuri Gagarin, his childhood somewhat, right?
Yes, and the conditions that he basically was born into, and when he was a young fellow, when the soldiers pretty much took over his village and what he had to see at that particular point in time. What was interesting that I didn't get to mention in the first part was there was an interesting part in the story, the one story that I read that said after everything had cleared out of his village and they were pretty much decimated emotionally and physically with all the houses messed up and so on, he was laying on his back one day, and him and his brother, the next song was, it mentions him and his brother. But what was interesting is he was laying on his back, and he told his brother a jet flew over top, and he said, to his brother, one day that's going to be me. I'm going to be a fighter pilot. And they kind of laughed about it. Mm-hmm. But oddly enough, even at the turmoil he was experiencing and the fear and the sense of loss and everything, he's seen that, and it was one of those impact moments that stuck with him, and he actually followed through, and that's what he was.
Yeah.
All the way up to the time he became the cosmonaut.
Yeah, that's and that's like the career of the United States early astronauts as well. Most of them were combat pilots and test pilots.
Absolutely, yes,
and things like that for all the new aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
So it proceeds from there, and he starts training for this mission.
Yes, and then I have some pieces that talk about that too. But what transpires is, he goes through the rigors of the training, and the physical aspect of it was difficult for a lot of guys that he was with at that particular time, because they would be hung upside down for long periods of time and spun around, and I think they're called centrifuges, at very high rates of speed. And for whatever reason, he could withstand a lot more than the other people. So based on his charm and charisma, and then the fact that he was so physically adept at being able to hang in under what really amounts to torturous type of training, he just became more and more a favorite. And so he just kind of worked his way up to the point where he was going to be the go-to guy. And now, again, based on the stories that I read, when he does eventually get launched, not lost, his wife didn't even know about this. It was so covered up or quieted, or however you want to say it. She didn't even know that he was launched until the neighbors came running across the field to tell them, because they heard it on a radio. And once again, if it was a made-for-TV movie, and all the stories I read, it would be unbelievable, the things that they put together, because you go, oh man, that couldn't happen like that. But it actually did.
And
so
on
now,
a string, too. Really primitive technology. It's like, I tell people all the time, I said, I show them my cell phone, and I said, this has like 5 times the computer power or more than the computers all the computers put together that landed the moon landing, and we use it to send funny pictures of cats to each other with it.
That's right. The interesting thing for me, as I read more, was the fact that, just like guys like you and myself, there are certain periods of your day when you're alone, and you have to reflect on certain things. So when he's with his squad and with his people and friends and so on around Star City, there's activity. But when he would go away from that, I was always like, what did he think? What was really in his mind and his heart? Did he suffer from fear and anxiety, or did he just have that component that a lot of people don't, that allowed him to rise above it and continue to play the role of Yuri Gagarin to the point where he became that guy? So, but I like the one song that I wanted to mention to you that's called Waterfall. It is about the potential for him to reflect. And I know a lot of the articles that I read talked about their lack of belief system in anything, or their questioning or curiosity of what, if anything, was out there. And there have been some paragraphs written that said that he was asked if he saw God when he went out there, and he said he did not see the face of God. So all that, I was just thinking, as a human being, did he reflect on anything? So Waterfall, in essence, is a song that is, he finds this place of solace that he goes to by himself, and he's just there, and there's water running off the hillsides and the mountains, and it creates that ambiance and that sound, and he gets lost in his own thoughts there.
Well, let's play that one while we're doing it. So,
Thank you.
This is exactly the track he was talking about, Waterfall. We'll be back in a couple minutes here on the House of Prog.
Take me down to the waterfall, let me wash my sins away. One more trip down the lonely road, I'll be on my way from here. The cool picture lets me know just who I am. They see me as a hero, but I'm just a simple man. I am. So let me stand in the waterfall, let me wash my sins away. Help me feel you, Jesus, 'cause you know I'm on my way from here.
And we're back, and you were listening to music from Seconds Before Landing's great new album. It's called Cosmonaut. And I'm here with John Crispino. He is the originator of all this material. And we're going to continue to talk about Cosmonaut. So he did finally collect himself enough to get this done.
Yes.
I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about Gargarin.
Both of us.
Yeah, both of you. It probably seems like a joint venture now. But so he went through this, and he eventually got launched.
Correct. He was, like we talked about just a few minutes ago, he was put into a situation that was less than stellar, but what he determined with his determination, he was not going to not go. And one thing that I found interesting, there was a particular portion inside the spacecraft itself that was like a keypad of sorts. And there was going to be a code number that was programmed into it. So if anything went wrong and he was not going to make it back to Earth, he could program this number in, and he could he can control his own fate, so to speak, because they weren't sure that they could get him back. So,
well, they had no idea what coming back through the atmosphere was going to be like.
That's exactly right. Yeah, he could have either went away and
or burned up,
never came back, or came back and had the complete opposite effect where he just got cooked on the way in.
Right.
So they gave him an option, but then what they did, for whatever reason, they chose not to give him the code number.
Huh.
They decided that they were not going to reveal what the number was. And the way they tell you about how he's brought in and loaded in, and then there's a quite a considerable amount of time that he sits on the launch pad waiting to be launched. One of his friends, whose name escapes me now, came up to the craft, and he was inside and making sure all the straps were on and so on and so forth, and he gave him the number. And I thought that was a rather cool thing to do, because you don't mess around at that particular point in time in the Soviet Union, because you're either sent away or killed, or it was bad things. But he just did not want him to go out there and perhaps float away. And then when he does get out there, he goes out for about 18 hours, I think. Or no, wait. Was it 18 hours?
Something like that.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly. No, maybe it wasn't even that long. No, I think maybe it was like an hour and 48 minutes. I think that's what it was.
Yeah, because he only went 5 times around, right?
Yeah, and the cool part was he was seeing sunups, sunrises, sunsets, the whole deal. Now he's out there, and everything's going pretty good. So it's like when you get on a turnpike and you start to ride, and your car is nice, everything's going good, air conditioning's good or whatever, and the music's good. He was enjoying it completely. So now that's what the next song kind of leads into, which is Close to Heaven, because he's out there. He's above the clouds. He's interacting with, let's say, make-believe angels or whatever, but he's in the moment. He's no longer of this earth. He's of outer space now, and this is the joy that he feels at that time.
Okay. So let's play that one. And
awesome.
We're going to play Close to Heaven. That's exactly what he was just talking about. We're going to continue jumping through the story. We're not playing every track, but we're kind of jumping through the story to give you a really, really nice sample of it. So here we go. This is Close to Heaven from the new album Cosmonaut by Seconds Before Landing.
that you know I like. Feel the sunlight in your hair. Hold me close, let me feel your skin. A few more days and my journey begins. Say a little prayer for me. I know how much you care for me. I'll fly above the clouds, I'll buzz past the moon. I'll watch the sun come up. I should be home by noon. Looking for the angels as I touch the sky. I may make it close to heaven. I feel so alive. Awake at 5 a.m., can't see the light. Slept like a baby all through the night. It's been a long time. Now it's almost time. Look me over, say it's time to go. I'll bump it right down a lonely road. Here comes the sunshine. It's almost my time. A final handshake and they load me in. For those of you who care for me, say a little prayer for me. I went high above the clouds, I flew past the moon, and here comes the sun. I made it home by noon. The angels gave away as I touched their sky, and I made it close to heaven. I feel so alive.
And we're back with John Crispino of Seconds Before Landing. And we just played a bunch of tracks from the new album. It is called Cosmonaut. Wanted to take a little break from the story of the album and talk a little bit about how this album was made, who's on it, the fantastic work that was done recording and mastering this, because this really sounds tremendous. It is the best sounding Seconds Before Landing album that I've heard so far.
Thank you.
Because so things are progressing. And,
yes, try to make it a little better each time if possible.
Let's talk a little bit about the making of the album.
Well, to just backtrack a little bit, once I came up with the idea, I honestly didn't think that I would do another conceptual type album, only because The Great Deception, which went over really, really well for a first release, it was very draining because I tend to get really involved with a character, and in this case there were two characters, and you start to live their life a little bit. And the more I read, the more I wanted to, though, and then it became not just a want but a need, so I started to write according to their lives and so on. But what I did was I pretty much put the bulk of the music together in my studio, and I'll discuss certain things about certain songs with the bass player, whoever it might be, and then we incorporate that. Then they add their parts. But fortunately for me now, I've had the basic, I've had exactly the same people for all the albums, including the EP, which was Trio Volume 1. Mm-hmm. And I've just had the guests come in on the first album, which was Trey Gunn from King Crimson and Tim Bogert from Jeff Beck Group, who played on the first. But my guys know me, guys and gals, they know me well enough now and how I work. So we have a really nice thing going where I just talk to them in terms that we've kind of come up with each other that makes sense. So I'll put the bulk of the song together and I'll take it and turn it over to, like, say, the bass player or Steve Schufert, who's a guitar player of mine. And we work on their part, and they have full creative control in the sense of I'll give them a basic idea, but I allow them to work their magic, and then we put it together. And sometimes there's discussions back and forth, but it all comes together as one cohesive song at the end. And the same with Vanessa Campagna, who sang on this album for me. It's I'll do a very primitive type of vocal that I would like her to sing, but she knows without a doubt that she can make it her own, and it allows her to kind of flourish as well. And I think you'll hear her a little bit later, too, on the show. But then once it's all done here, the mixing is done here by myself, and then it's all shipped to England to Andy Jackson, who is he works as David Gilmour's engineer, and he works for Pink Floyd, and he was also a two-time Grammy nominee. So he and I have developed a really good relationship over the past 5 or 6 years, and he's a taskmaster, which I like. Because he wants the best for the material, regardless of whether it is me or anybody else. He kind of pushes me a little bit, which I really respect and like. And we work on it until he and I have come to a decision that it's time to put it to rest now and it's ready for release. And we did the exact same thing with this one and probably remixed the album, I'd say, probably 4 times. And to get it exactly the way we wanted it and so on and so forth before we released it. And now we're able to present it in a way that we're kind of proud of.
Well, I would be if I were you. It's a really, really great sounding album.
Thank you.
And I picking on a couple things. I really, really love the way the basses and the drums are recorded this time.
Thank you.
I think drums are so hard to record. And a lot of times they, get washed out or it sounds like rain on a roof or, whatever, or the cymbals don't sound right. But drums were really, really recorded well as bass on this album.
Thank you. I'll tell you a little secret here. Probably. What I did was I of course I use acoustic drums of all types and different types of percussive instruments that I have here, but I really relied on my Roland electronic drums this time. They're set up as a kit, and they are actually a kit, but they're electronics, because I could get a richer sounding bass drum and the toms and so on. They just kind of resonated more on this in a better way for me. I doubt if I would ever want to play them out live except for special effects, but because acoustic drums are where I feel more comfortable. But I think that's basically what you get to hear now. And I'm glad that you said that because it makes me feel like I made the right decision there.
Yeah, I think they sound really, really great.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. So there's a second part of this story.
Yes. And that's Vladimir Komarov, who was also, who became friends, I should say, with Yuri Gagarin during their time at Star City and such. And again, another overachiever who was a very modest man, where if you could talk about Gagarin in the sense of being almost like kind of like a Frank Sinatra type character, he was like out there.
National hero, too.
Absolutely. Like he was living large. And then Komarov, on the other, from what I read now, of course, is very much more understated. He's like the Dean Martin, you know what I mean? He's picking up little bits of bad habits and so on from Komarov and their buddies, but he's more reserved and more of a kind of family man, let's say that way, But he was very aggressive and he was very well educated, and he was put into a position where he was going to be put into space, and the first time that he went was successful, and the next time there was a flight called the Soyuz 1 that he was going to be put in, and it was rushed. And everybody on that end knew that it was a rushed project. And the reason it was rushed is because the Russians wanted to stay ahead of the United States government, and come hell or high water, they were not going to let this flight not go up. So I think
it wasn't ready.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I think at the time that he was even considered to be put into the ship, there were 17 major problems that they knew any one of the 17 that could go wrong would cause disaster. So what he did was he started to plead his case the best you could in 1960s Russia for someone to please speak out. Come to my aid here. I want to go in this flight, but I don't want to go as a suicide mission. This is like a kamikaze thing. I'm going to go and not come back. Are you crazy? So now, through all the things that lead up to this particular song, 36 Dogs, he met with these people, and I'll call them from KGB, but they may have had a different military title. And he went with them, or they came to him one night at a place he was staying. It was an apartment building. And he pled with them. He said, am I not worth more? Am I not worth more than 36 dogs that went before me? And that's the premise of this song, because they had launched dogs before. There was a dog named Leica that became like their hero for a while. And he pleaded with them to the point where, in the one story that I read, they said his knees buckled and he was actually sobbing and they had to pick him up. But when he went to walk back into his house, the thing that was most impressive to me was those agents that remained alive when they told their story said he had composed himself in a matter of seconds. So when he walked back into his place, the people on the inside, which was his family, would have never noticed how much torment he was in. So one more part to that story is the day that it came time to be, the day it was going to be launched, I should say, Gagarin made every attempt to physically work his way to the ship, so much to the point where he put on a uniform and literally tried to force his way into the areas where they would be able to be loaded, and they just weren't going to have it because Gagarin was their hero, as we said earlier, and Komarov reluctantly took the flight. And, as this album goes on, you learn that he never did survive it. But it was a different time, it was different times for different people, especially Russia and the space race.
And he went up knowing he wasn't going to survive.
Yes, and
he knew.
That's the other thing that's just, it weighed on me heavy, only because where does that kind of courage come from? The love of country? I don't know. I don't know, because I don't have that component in me. And I talk about that with friends all the time now, because we talk about this story because it's so fascinating to us anyway. Like, how do you do that? You love something so much, or you're so dedicated that you go out this way. And he anticipated that he might be able to make things right, because he was pretty much a genius when it came to the crafts and so on. But, it was minutes into the launch, and he knew that he was not going to come back, So 36 Dogs, to introduce the song, 36 Dogs is just him pleading that night, saying, when he says it sure is cold tonight, that's why my hands are shaking. He's trying to save face as he's talking to these agents, because he's trembling out of fear. It's not cold. He's worked up. He's an emotional wreck, but he knows he's hours away from being launched in a death trap. So that's what 36 Dogs is about. Okay.
I can't describe it any more than that. This is a pretty harrowing song. This is 36 Dogs from the new Seconds Before Landing album. It's entitled Cosmonaut, and it is available everywhere. And when we come back in a little bit, we'll be talking about where you can get that. You're listening to the House of Prog.
It sure is cold tonight. That's why my hands are shaking. Is there anyone you can talk to? Is there someone who cares? Don't let me go like liquor. Or simply float away. Isn't there anyone anyone you can talk to? Isn't there someone who cares? 36 dogs before me. 36 dogs. No one cares.
And I'm back here with John Crispino of Seconds Before Landing. And the new album is called Cosmonaut. And what's going on in our story right now, as the Cosmonaut
Vladimir Komarov, yeah.
Vladimir Komarov was pleading with the I guess the space agency or whoever,
yes,
there, not to send him,
right?
Because the launcher surely wasn't ready.
That's correct. I think there was a minimum of 14 or 17 problems that they knew of that they just chose to overlook because it was very important that they get this craft in the air before the United States got one in. And they disregarded the fact that he may die. It was a roll of the dice.
It was not particularly important to them.
Correct. Yeah, I hate to say that even now. I mean, 60 years later, but yes, he was disposable. He was
Expendable.
yeah, expendable. Yes, exactly. And that's exactly what the way they looked at it. If it worked, great. If it didn't, they would figure out a way to work through it, cover it up, and proceed. Because way before even Yuri Gagarin, there was a massive explosion on a launch pad in Russia, and I wished I could remember the name of it now, but there were hundreds of people that were killed because it misfired and exploded right on the launch pad, and some really significant people in the government were killed and burned to death right there. They couldn't save anyone. So they knew that their space agency and their technology was still rough, to say the very least, but they forged forward. And this is the decision that they made. And so now he's when I say that he pleaded to stay alive, I don't think that's disrespectful. He told them to be reasonable. Please don't make me go through with this, because I'm going to go through with it, but if you can reconsider. So now he's at the point where he's going to be launched. And that's where the next song called It's Time Now comes up, because all the way up to the last minutes, he's being reassured that everything will be okay. The chorus is kiss your kids and hug your wife.
But he knows that's not true.
Yeah. He's a dead man walking. And they're still trying to convince him. They're saying positive upkeep things like, kiss your kids and hug your wife. You need not worry. You'll be home tonight. When you come back, we'll have a drink. Now it's time now, meaning it's time to get in. You got to get in now. We got to launch this thing. So, once again, I hate to repeat myself, but man, these guys have a component that was inside of them that I can't. Like you and I were just talking off air. It's like, what is in a person that makes them be that courageous, or what is that makes that thing happen to them? But he went anyway for love of country.
Oh yeah. So let's play that track, and we will move on. So the name of that track is It's Time Now.
Correct.
All right, this is It's Time Now from the new album from Seconds Before Landing, Cosmonaut.
Come to an end. tell me there's nothing you can do. Kiss your kids and hug your wife. You need not worry, you'll be home tonight. When you come back, we'll share a drink. It's time now. It's time now. But in my heart, I know they lie. I can see the look in your eyes. So I kiss my kids and I hug my wife. They lie.
And we're back. I'm here with. Hold on.
Same person.
It isn't that. I had the speaker on, so it was going to echo like crazy. Yeah, I'm here with John Crispino of Seconds Before Landing, and we've been talking not only about the album but the story as well, the storyline of the new album Cosmonaut, and it's really quite. I mean, the first part of the album is very kind of uplifting.
Yes. Actually, it's exciting if you look at it from his perspective.
Sure. and very uplifting and exciting. And this part is kind of like takes the cover off of what goes on and shows you a bit of the seedy side of the whole affair.
You get a look behind the curtain. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
you get the look behind the curtain.
Right. And that's what research does for you sometimes.
Yes.
So let's talk about the next. We just played. What was the track?
It's time now.
It didn't. Yeah, it's time now. I'm sorry, it didn't come up on the list. That happens sometimes. But yeah, so where are we going now? He's going up.
Yeah, he's out there now. But what I do is I take you to the point where he becomes brought into the facility, and this song is an instrumental, but I broke it down into 7 parts when I wrote it, or 6 parts. He is brought into the facility. They put you on a vehicle that transports you out to where the launch pad is. They take you up in an elevator. They put you in. Now, he's in a device. I want to call it a device, but of course it's the craft, where it's so small on the inside, there wasn't any extra equipment allowed to be on him or with him because it couldn't fit. So in essence, if you think of a thimble, like women used for sewing and stuff, it'll be the same thing as jamming your finger inside of there because the only room was right in front of him for the control panels and so on. So now he's going into this ship.
Was it the same thing for Gagarin's ship?
Yeah, they were very, very small.
Similar?
Yeah, very similar in size on the interior of it. And I would suppose if you had the least bit of claustrophobia. But listen, by the time you're at this stage, you've been put through all these testing and stuff that we talked about that happened back in Star City. So you've made that clear that you can handle all that. But now he's put into this. So what I did is I wrote this song called Cosmonaut, and I have it broken down into sections: Suiting Up, Love of Country, Wave and So Long, Apprehension, Weightless, and Acceptance. The last part, after the violin parts, you'll actually hear footage that I was able to get through friends that you can hear the actual spacecraft and the conversation that was trying to take place between the craft and the ground. And from everything that I read, in the very beginning of his panicking, they wouldn't even respond to him. There was a friend of his that was inside the control tower where they were able to listen, and he broke down. They said he was sobbing, and he wanted to make communication back. And then you'll hear bits and pieces where they try to talk back. But they say that this is him screaming all the way back, because now what's happened is there was an antenna that messed up everything, and it caught onto the backup parachutes and so on and so forth. So he knew as he was going to come back into the planet, to Earth, of course, he was going to come in at too high of a rate of speed. So not only was he going to start to burn up, but he was going to make an impact that would never allow anything to hit the ground that hard and survive. And you'll hear him at the very end shouting, and he was very angry, of course, and frightened, and this is supposedly the last audio footage of him in his life.
Okay.
Real uplifting, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, real uplifting. But it is the story. It is what happened.
Yeah, it's me. It's just me telling the real story, and I'm kind of embarrassed to say that I didn't know more about this before I started to research. I think, and the reason I did this was I truly believe that their story needed to be told by someone, and I'm sure it's been told in a variety of books, but I wanted to tell it in my way, based on my research put to the music that I love to write and record with my fellow musicians.
Okay. So how about we play this and just continue with Oh How I Miss You?
Sure.
If you could describe with that.
Yes. After the end of this one, like I said, you will hear him basically, you're listening to a man whose life is about to end in a few seconds. And the last thought that I had when I was trying to figure out how do I put this album to bed, how do I stop it all and have it make sense, I sat around one day and I started to think in terms of like, what happens to the people that were left behind? What happens to, in this particular case, his wife? After any person passes away, there's a lot of fanfare and people bring food over and so on and so forth. And, oh, if you need us, we'll be there. But then basically they go back to their own lives, and rightfully so, but you're left alone. And so I wanted to write a song from the perspective of the wife, Valentina. And that's when I wrote Oh How I Miss You. And it just talks about her dealing with the impact and the loss that she feels. And I asked my friend Vanessa Campagna to sing it for me. And I think that she brought the lyrics and everything that I wrote to life, because she portrays it as a woman who has just lost the love of her life. And it doesn't matter if he's going to be recognized as a hero or whatever. It's just all she knows is she's come home to an empty house now.
Okay. So we'll play that right after
Cosmonaut.
the title track of the album, Cosmonaut. You're listening to the House of Prog. This will be Cosmonaut, and then Oh How I Miss You from the album Cosmonaut here on the House of Prog.
The sun doesn't seem as bright anymore. The kids' laughter hurts my ears. My coffee is cold and my toast is dry. I use my napkin to wipe my tears. I can't lay awake in our bed anymore. I try to sleep in your favorite chair. I hold your shirt up to my face and breathe. I make believe that you're still here. Oh, how I miss you. Oh, how I miss you. Make the day go away. Oh, how I miss you. Oh, how I miss you. Please make the world go away.
And that is kind of how, except for the conclusion, the end, the conclusion, the end is pretty much where John's going to leave you on this album. Some really very difficult things have happened, and there's people left behind, and we don't know how that's going to affect them for the rest of their lives. Certainly not positively. Right?
Yeah, not positive at all. And, she was alone with her daughter, meaning Mrs. Komarov, and they did what Russia did at that time, which was they offered her an apartment, which was, one step above not having a lot, and they gave her, finances to live on, but nothing more. And once he was buried, he was basically recognized as the hero that he was, and she was left to live her life, not in poverty, because at the time nobody had a whole lot, but not very well.
I wonder what happened to the kid.
That's a good question. I think the one daughter is still alive.
Let's look her up.
Yeah.
Facebook. No, I'm just kidding. Facebook.
I wish I could do that right now.
Facebook
Yeah.
creeping time,
Yeah.
But let me know if you find anything out.
I will. I will email you.
That's where we're going to leave you on the album. You have the basic story, and you've heard about a third of the music. So we'll leave that there. I think it's a really, really cool double-edged story. There's a very, very positive first section. There's a very tumultuous and very difficult second section. And then, of course, the other piece is that something happens to Gargarin, too, where he doesn't really make it either very much further after Komarov passes.
Yeah, he's like 5 weeks later, he died in a mysterious plane crash while he was in a fighter jet.
Yeah.
And they still haven't decided what to call it yet, but other than mysterious.
60 years later.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How convenient. But that was the Soviet Union back then. That's the way things were done. So, John, you wanted to talk a little bit about some of the people who played on this album?
Yes, I would like to actually thank them in this form, even though I know they know how I feel about them for sure, but just to mention them by name, which I think is fair, because without their incredible talents contributing to what I do, I would never be able to produce and put together a sound like this, and I'm very thankful for each and every one of them. So my guitar players are Steve Schufert, Rick Witowski, who plays for also Crack the Sky, and
He's
a guitarist.
a Pittsburgh guy?
He's a West Virginia guy, but he's all over Pittsburgh, that's for sure. And one of the funniest and nicest guys you'll ever meet. And I was very fortunate to meet a young guitar player from California named Eric Maldonado. Eric Maldonado. What did I say? But anyway, yeah, he's terrific, and he's got all the fire and the flair that goes along with Rick, who's the funk, and Steve, who's like the rock and the bluesy kind of guy. So I got really three terrific guitar players. And then I have my primary bass guitar player. His name's J.D. Garrison, who right this weekend is playing at the Stone Pony on stage with Bruce Springsteen.
Nice.
And Guy Bartour is in Israel. He's my bass player that I use from over there. And then I have Vanessa Campagna on background vocals on this one, all female vocals actually. I have Jamie Peck, who plays a lot of the Steinway piano and all of the horn parts. Let's see, who am I leaving out? Please, please, please don't leave anybody out.
That's
Guitar, bass, blah, blah, blah. I think that's it, and me.
okay.
Yeah. So I think I got everybody, and if I don't, because I only have my core group, and that's it.
Well, they did a great job on the album. And like I was saying, actually both on air and off air, great production, mastering, and finalization of this album. I mean, it is the best sounding Seconds Before Landing album. So you are really, gaining ground on this.
Thanks. Everything that we do, we try to get a little bit better. The one constant also, besides the musicians that I've had, is Andy Jackson, like I mentioned earlier. He has been with me since The Great Deception, and I'm very happy that he took me in and worked with me on all these projects, so he masters them for me, and he has a really strong pedigree, and he helps me get the overall final sound that I look for. And I'm very happy to work with him, and I'm very grateful for his time.
So
and I'm
John,
grateful. I want to thank
sure.
you, though. I'm sorry. I wanted to thank you for allowing me to be on the show tonight and talk about the music and then present it to your listeners.
Well, I appreciate that, actually. I really think that every time that you've made an album, since, we started talking, they get better and better, and you always have something very, very interesting to say that, through your music, also on the show, but through the music, that I think people should be very, very interested in. One of the higher moments of progressive rock in the last couple years have come through some of the stuff you've been doing. So I thank you for coming on the show. The big thing is, though, we need to talk about,
My
before I
pleasure.
let you go, is how people can get a hold of this music.
It's very simple this time. They can go to secondsbeforelanding.bandcamp.com. That's where it is for right now. I've chosen to go exclusively with Bandcamp for the time being, and that's where it is.
Okay. So that's very, very easy to get to. All you have to do is go to Bandcamp. You can look up Seconds Before Landing and do that. I was just getting a question from Hops. Do we have permission to play this album now?
Yes, you do. Absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I put it in the chat room. I think we do, because he wanted to get other program hosts on it.
Oh no, please, by all means. I truly thank you for giving me the exposure on your show tonight. I'm sure all my musicians are appreciative of that too, and onward and upward. We're already working on the next project, believe it or not.
Really?
Oh yeah, we do this 7 days a week, or pretty close to
Is
7
there
days.
already subject matter?
Well, I'll leave you in on a little information. On late spring or beginning of summer, I'll release Trio Volume 2, which will have 3 songs again. We call it an EP, but it'll have 3 songs. That's going to be completely different than this. They're more linear sounding. There's like a lot of, well, you'll just have to wait. I'll get you copies. But then we've already been kicking around an idea of doing a prequel to The Great Deception. So The Great Deception was the very first album that came out that talks about the apocalyptical state of the world and so on. And it's been on my mind.
Man.
Yeah, it's been on my. It couldn't be any truer. So I was thinking about maybe going back and writing about how the individual that appears in The Great Deception came to be in the position where he was. So I would start out from his early life and take you into what became the Great Deception. But it's still in the talking stage, and I'm charting things out now, so we'll see. But right now, that's the plan.
Very good. Well, John, thank you very much for coming on. Everybody, you can get this album we've been talking about at Bandcamp. Very, very easy. I don't think there's anybody who listens to the show that doesn't have a Bandcamp account. So it's easy for you to go get it. So go out there and do it. You'll really enjoy it.
Can I say one more thing?
Sure.
Just real quick. I would like to thank the listeners for all their support that they've shown since around 2011 or 12 when the first album came out, and the encouraging emails from around the world that we receive about the product and about what we do. It makes it easier, and it's very encouraging. So I want to thank the people that buy the music, too, for allowing us to do it.
Yeah, and John and I were talking before the show, and we both realized that a lot of our mail and responses and things like that, and for him, purchases of albums come from the Far East and the Middle East and Europe.
That's correct. I mentioned to you that I had some phone conversations with Facebook, and they're able to find out a lot about demographics just by using certain keywords and everything. And then we were trying to find out when would be the best places in the United States to talk about progressive rock and promote progressive rock. And for all you other bands that are out there that are looking for a niche in the United States, what Facebook told me that day on the phone was Connecticut and the Pacific Northwest. So don't go through any hassle of trying to hit it in the Middle West or any place like that. The Pacific Northwest and Connecticut are the 2 biggest spots in the entire United States for searches on progressive rock. So spend your money promoting there, because that's what they told me.
Well, they keep telling me I'm big in Japan.
Well, I'll tell you what, you're getting a little bigger in Japan now, too, because your shows have done incredibly well and rebroadcast overseas.
So I have something in common with Tom Waits, you're saying.
And Baraka, who's from Japan and a very big thing. Yeah.
Oh, I met those guys from Baraka.
Are they the best?
Really, really super nice guys.
Yeah, they're terrific.
I met them on the cruise,
Mm-hmm.
and I sold their albums, actually. That's what I was doing on the cruise.
There you go.
Yeah, really nice folks. Boy, can they play.
Oh, yeah. Listen, I've been able through what we do to meet a lot of nice people in this business, and it is kind of like a fraternity in the sense because you look out for each other and you kind of give helpful hints or information, just like, the whole Connecticut Pacific Northwest thing. You would think that major cities, like I was hitting cities like New York City and Chicago and Florida and so on and so forth, California, and they were saying, look, you don't have any market there, meaning the progressive rock genre. And when I found out that those two small pockets on opposite sides of the United States, I thought, man, I want to share this with everybody that sells prog or, does prog, so now.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
So there you go, guys.
And, same thing for the festivals too. But the problem is, it seems like it has always been concentrated on East Coast, festivals and things like that.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, hopefully the music will start to become more accepted in the United States, because there really are a lot of terrific bands. And like, I have no connection on any kind of business level with anyone, but there's a brand new band for me anyway called Thank You Scientist
I've seen them twice. Yeah.
Oh man, I just love that band. And they're from, I think, the New Jersey, lower New York area or somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Terrific band. So hopefully bands like this will keep building and expanding out and so on and so forth. So it'll take time.
Yeah, it does. But, okay. John, I'm going to let you go.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you being on tonight. We'll do this again. And maybe we'll also find some other things to talk about on maybe some panels we were thinking about doing.
Would love to be a part of it. And I want to once again, thank you and the listeners for supporting what I do.
All right. So this has been a conversation with John Crispino of Seconds Before Landing. We played about a third of the new album Cosmonaut for you. We told you where to get it. You can get it very, very easily through Bandcamp. So go ahead and do that. Dial that up. Get that going. And I think you'll really, really like the album. John, we'll see you again real soon.
Thank you, and have a great weekend.
All right. Take care, John.